an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Cradle, Book 8, Wintersteel, Chapters 23, 24, and 25. In these chapters, guys, I didn't know that this is what I wanted. I didn't know that it could happen this way. I'm a little sad even. But Yerin and Ruby bonded here, and it's amazing, and I'm so excited. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Andy for commissioning this episode. I wanted to start off this because, those of you who have been following along know that there is only one episode's worth of pages left, roughly 40 something. And Andy has commissioned 2 more episodes. So what I wanted to ask Andy, in the sight of God and man, on camera, was whether or not I should read all 40-something pages and finish the book for the next episode, and talk about that, and then do maybe a recap for the one remaining episode? Or would he want to inflict maximum pain and damage and have me only cover chapter 26 in one episode and cover chapter 27 in the following episode? And, that's up to Andy. I would find him cruel if he chose the second, but I wouldn't be mad. I would just give him a dirty look and judge him a tiny bit, but I would get it. So, putting it out there. Evil is suggesting having a question and answer episode, open discussion, perhaps. The thing is, question and answer episodes can be tough when the people listening can't see the question. I try and read everything out so that people know what I'm talking about, but it can be a little bit tricky. And Andy says you won't be able to stop at 26. Go ahead and finish in the next step. Okay. All right, so I'll do a kind of a recap / predictions thing in the final episode, and I'll do some question and answer stuff as best I can. And I just wanted to let people who are listening know what to expect for the last couple of episodes. I haven't done a recap for any of the other books because there was always another one right after, so I didn't have to worry about it. But, this is a different situation. Guys, I'm so excited. Okay. I'm gonna talk about Yerin and Ruby right out of the gate here. And I know that you guys can't tell me this. It's really funny too, because just last episode I was like, does she have Ruby's memories? And then there's a whole thing regarding Ruby's memories in this section. I don't know, because we haven't spent any time with Yerin after she completes this advance, right? So, we spend some time, but we're watching her fight. It's not like we're actually hearing what she's feeling. There is a loss here. Ruby and she have sort of blended together, which means that Yerin isn't really who she used to be. And Ruby doesn't exist anymore. And I really appreciated the acknowledgement that Will White gives by saying that she feels grief over it. And feels Ruby's grief as well. Because Ruby just barely got advanced enough that she was able to, go off on her own and explore her own existence. And yet, as much as she was able to do that, it wasn't she had cold water thrown over her by Lyndon's reaction to her trying to kiss him, which is exactly what I thought was going to happen. But luckily, she hears him when he says it and really seems to get where he's coming from. It still makes her deeply sad and is very terrible to read. But I wasn't sure if she would have a more violent sort of reaction. And I don't mean violent like lashing out physically. I mean just like emotionally violent. And instead, she just seems to like take it and internalize that sadness. And she goes home and just sort of, it seems like, goes about her business the way that she was supposed to go about it, either way. And I was surprised at that. But then when she and Yerin are talking after Yerin misses, she loses her first 2 matches with Sephara, which, guys, I missed somewhere when they mentioned that there's 5 matches this time. And when she loses the first 2, I really thought that was it. I just read right past the fact that there were going to be 5 this time. So I was freaking out a little bit, and then they were still talking as if she could win, and I was like, oh, okay, thank God. But when, you know, they're faced with what they can do, what's actually within their power, Ruby says she wants everybody to live. And I realized suddenly how important it is that Ruby and Yerin have the kind of relationship that they have had so far, where she has feelings for Lyndon, and while they're not really her feelings, they are. It's a strange situation, and it could have gone so differently if she were either distanced enough or, for whatever reason, not really invested in the safety of Yerin's friends. She has the same attachment to everyone that Yerin is close to, that Yerin has. And without that, things could have gone a really different way here. Because before considering fusing together, Yerin offers to let Ruby take her over completely. And if Ruby weren't so concerned about what Lyndon would think of her, she may have done that. And things would have gone in a totally different direction. And I just can't, it's just the fact that Ruby has sort of the developed personality and it's just, it's made it an advantage for the two of them. And that bears out once they actually go into fusing. And the fact that they both want the same thing winds up being so key to the success of the fusion, because that is what they eventually wind up focusing on, because their wills are battling one another, and that's part of what the trouble is with this. And it's really interesting to see how Yerin has her own battle here with a will, the same way that Lyndon has a battle with a will. And obviously it's on a very different scale when he's going up against a dread god's will. But nevertheless, it's like they're both having to engage in the same type of battle. They're very paralleled all the time. And it makes sense that they are story-wise, But I like that Will White can keep those symmetries, and it doesn't feel hacky. It doesn't feel forced or contrived. It's just sort of a circumstantial thing that you could almost imagine being accidental, So I love this for her. I'm super excited for her. I'm very proud. But also, I feel very sad for Ruby getting a taste of living as a person. And while we knew, and she kind of seemed to realize that living like that wasn't for her, that it couldn't really work. I mean, I say that. Evidently, there's a Blood Shadow out there who ran off and did his own fucking thing. So it's not like it's impossible. She could do it. But it would require a sacrifice of everything that has any meaning to her. You know, it's the whole reason that she wants to live and go out and experience things on her own is to fully immerse herself in things that she has grown to care about. And unfortunately, being able to immerse herself in things that she cares about and separating herself completely from Yerin, those are mutually exclusive situations. Probably. So it's, I just really, it was a very poignant, bittersweet moment that I thought was like surprisingly affecting. I really expected that once the two of them came to some sort of agreement to be allies in a really like material way, I expected to feel nothing but triumph and excitement. And I was really taken off guard at how sad I was during this. You know, I got like a little emotional over it, and I just didn't expect that at all. So anyway, let's talk about Chapter 23. Yerin is trying to advance, and eventually she succeeds. And what I had been talking about last week about her feeling like she was constantly in her master's shadow, especially in the eyes of the Winter Sage, turns out to be her revelation for Overlady, which it was really, really interesting. Like, I can't imagine when it's something that specific that isn't actually about her, as she puts it, what so many of ours would be. And it makes a lot of sense now why so many people fail to move on from Underlord to the next level, because that's a very subtle, accidental thing. Like, she stumbled on it in a moment of arguing and just happened to sense the shift in her spirit when she said it. And this whole scene is just really good. One of the first things that she says is, I will like put my sword through anything that gets in my way, or I'll stab anything in my way. Shame, that one had felt right. And I was kind of like, yeah, honestly, that I wouldn't have been surprised if that was it. But as usual, what Will White chooses to have the characters sort of focus be is much more about their insecurity than about their, like, it's not necessarily empowering in the way that one would imagine things like this to be, which I rather like, because frankly, that's not how most of us operate. Most of us are motivated by uglier, scarier things. We're not usually pushed forward by altruistic or purely like trying to be better. If we are trying to be better, it's often a result of trying to stop feeling a pain that we're feeling off because of something that we did or an experience that we had once before. And it makes sense to me that that would be at the root of what he chooses to explore for these characters, which makes me really wonder. I've sort of shared what my theory is with Lyndon and about how he's hungry being like his revelation, which I really don't like. I don't know. If it's not that, I really don't have any other ideas. But Mercy is somebody that I truly haven't got a theory yet. I don't have any sort of prediction on what hers would be. Hers had been, for getting to Underlady, I want my mother to be proud of me, but it just doesn't feel like that's quite there anymore. And it's not like, I mean, obviously when her mother scolded her in front of everyone, it's not like she didn't feel anything. She was ashamed and saddened and, you know, but it just didn't hit the way one would expect it to hit when your whole push forward was about pleasing this person. And then you fail very publicly when their life is like reliant on your success, allegedly. I don't know. I feel like that might not be it for her anymore. And I don't know what it actually is now. We haven't spent any time in Mercy's head, really. like, if I'm not mistaken, since she moved forward to Underlady after she like died and talked to her mom, I might be wrong. There might have been another time where we were in her head, but it's been a minute. So I just don't feel like I have a grasp anymore on where she is as a person and what she's feeling. Obviously there's the time when she was like, actually being scolded by her mother. We were in her head for that. But I mean, between then, between the fights, I just don't feel like I have seen a lot of her reaction to other fights, her reactions to what's happening with Lyndon and Yerin. It's been pretty much just about her fight and the reaction afterward. And that's been sort of it. So yeah, I just don't have a great sense of that anymore. So Charity keeps sort of like pushing Yerin here with her guidance on what the revelation is, that it's not necessarily even verbal. And Yerin is getting so frustrated. She's been trying everything. She understands like what Charity's saying, and they've had this conversation a million times already, but she's just like, dude, clearly that's not the key. Repeating the same shit to me that I heard already. This isn't helpful. And the Winter Sage comes in, asks Charity to give her a break and leave, and Charity does. Yerin thinks mistakenly that this means that she's going to get a rest, and instead, the Winter Sage is like, no, I'm going to come at you. And this is when she does do you know how Adama advanced to Overlord? Yerin groaned inwardly. She did know the story, not from her master, who didn't like sharing stories about himself, but from the Winter Sage. She seemed to think she could hammer Yerin into his mold by sheer repetition. He dueled every sword artist he could reach, overlords, underlords, even low golds. After every duel, he would ask the other person what they thought of his style. He wasn't as powerful as you are, He was disciplined. He was renowned. Yerin leapt back, creating space. Thought my Overlord revelation was supposed to be about me. You think you know better than I do? Min Shui snapped. Who better to give you inspiration? You have his path, his sword, his remnant, his clothes. He is the reason why you are alive, not to mention why you have any connection to Sword Authority at all. Do you think you have nothing to learn from him? Do you think that because you have more power than he did at your age, that means you have more wisdom? I get it, Yerin shouted, using more power in her strike than she meant to. You don't want to hear about him, you don't want to talk about him, but you want to succeed him. Well, if you want to be the next Sage of the Endless Sword, you should know everything about him, you should remember him. And Yerin snaps, and absolutely throws her sword, just in a temper, not like trying for an attack, just chucks it. I'm not him, not trying to be him. He would have wanted me here, so I'm here. All he wanted was to pass on his path, and I'm going to do it if I bleed for it, but I'm not him. And this is when she feels the tremble in her spirit and immediately sits down and cycles. And there's this kind of disappointment from her as she realizes this is what it is. That the whole thing is that she's not somebody else, which doesn't even feel like it's actually about her as a person. It's just about who she isn't. And she just, I don't blame her. That doesn't feel like, and I'm emphasizing the word feel, like it is a personal thing. If it's just, oh, you're not so-and-so. But the thing is, she clearly needed to hear it. As much as she knows she's not her master, and as much as she would get angry at Min Shui for constantly trying to make her a copy of him, in a lot of ways she was also still trying to copy him. And this is just a danger when you admire somebody's work a lot. If you're an artist, a writer, a painter, or even doing what I do, a podcaster, if there is somebody out there whose work you really like, it can be very difficult to make something your own and not just copy what they do. And it can be really scary Because you'll watch somebody who's extremely successful and you assume their success comes from their method. And so you feel copying their method is going to be your track to success. But there are so many different versions of things out there that we all love that are not similar to one another at all. And when we just try and limit ourselves to somebody else's footsteps, we are limiting ourselves in a variety of different ways, not just in expression, but also just our imagination, the ways that we'll let ourselves think about something. We'll immediately cut off ideas because they don't fit into a box that we think we need to fit into to succeed. And that's what's so interesting about what happens with Yerin. And it sort of is linked to what I was saying in the last episode, where the thing that's going on with her and Ruby is not, this is uncharted territory. You know, she has managed something that only one other person has managed, and that person sucked and their blood shadow ran away. And so everybody's giving her advice or making assumptions on information that truly, when it comes down to it, that they don't have. And Yerin is so focused on what her master did and what he was like that the very obvious "what's your signature?" question that comes from Malice doesn't even fucking register. Even though anybody reading this is like, girl, what do you think your fucking signature is? Are you kidding me? But she doesn't see it because she's just looking in the direction of the sword icon and the sword aura and the sword path, and wants to pretend this whole other part of her isn't part of her. And I love that, like, moving forward, she does something that nobody else has done, that nobody had considered trying to do at the level she's at, and achieves an advancement that is essentially brand new. She isn't an archlord, but she's not just an overlady either. And that makes total sense, that once you finally stop trying to stay on this very narrow path, you stumble across something completely new that nobody even knew was a possibility, because you finally let go of this arbitrary sort of standard that you've clung to because it's all you knew, and something that that meant a lot to you as a child, you know, especially because he was so important to her. It's understandable why she would do this, but this is something that I sort of ran into myself with, like, finally deciding to podcast full time. I didn't know anybody who did this at all. I still don't, if I'm being honest. I know some people out there who podcast full time, and all of them are part of a major network. And I just don't really, I didn't have anybody to model after what I was doing. And so for a while, I assumed I couldn't do it, because I just thought if it could be done, somebody'd have done it, sort of thing, you know? And it's really odd. I think that's part of why Will White's, like, blog entry affected me so much when I read it, because it's the first time that I've read about somebody else's, like, working experience, and it was relevant to me, because most of the time, anything that feels relevant, it's in my distant past, working in service industries or hospitality or whatever. And this was the first time that it felt like somebody gets what I'm doing, like, right now, and what I've just gone through creating something of my own. And I'm just like, I really am delighted at the turn of this being something that nobody's seen. And I admit myself, the Blood Sage comes to her and tells her about bonding once she's reached Archlord, right? Is that it? Or once she's reached Sage to become Monarch? Is that the thing that I'm trying to remember what stage he tries to tell her she can do the bonding at. And it never even entered my mind that you could do it sooner than that. I should have realized that that dude doesn't know what he's necessarily talking about any more than anyone else. I was giving him the benefit of the doubt as the one other person who manifested enough of a fully formed blood shadow that he had an idea and that he was working with some like genuine information. But really, I should have understood that the very fact that his blood shadow ran away from him meant that he wasn't exploring his options as fully because he had not gotten the relationship with his blood shadow that Yerin was starting to develop with Ruby. So that in and of itself, like, I just took his word for it. Just like so many of the things in these books, you know, we just take the word of people who seem to know better. And then we wind up finding out that they didn't really know. It wasn't even like they were lying. They just didn't know. The only thing that they lied about was that they did know. The only thing they were dishonest about was pretending that they knew everything. And so the idea that they could bond sooner, it makes total sense because the two of them are friendlier to one another than he clearly was with his own shadow. And I say friendlier. They're not exactly friendly, but they understand each other and they want the same things, and that seems to be enough. So yeah, this is wild. I'm really excited about this. So Evil says, no, he is still the most well-informed. I mean, I didn't say he wasn't. I'm just saying that I assumed that he had all the information out of everybody. And he doesn't. He has the most information of something that nobody knows anything about. And just because he has the most doesn't mean that his is right. Because this experience is clearly incredibly subjective and individual to every person who goes through it. That's why these blood shadows are so interesting, is that they can manifest and be used in very different ways depending on who's handling them and what their goals are. So I just assumed that there's like a textbook series of steps and that he had figured out what they were. And I'm really having to step back and realize that in the way the like magic works in this universe, there's no series of steps for anything. There's a more predictable set of circumstances up until Underlord. And then after that, it's begins to get a lot more fluid. And as Dross says, the sacred arts only get weirder. I just got to keep that shit in mind. So, and Yerin, like, when she advances, doesn't really even feel that different. You can tell, like, when she first advances to Overlady, I mean, I get the sense a little bit disappointed that there isn't more of a change right away. And that is not the case when she advances with Ruby, but we will get there. She's just feeling really, it's a combo of not feeling physically that much different, and her revelation is so disappointing to her personally that it has drained all of the excitement and feeling of accomplishment out of what she did. So let's go back to Linden. When he, poor Ruby, she wakes up like after falling asleep, in the bed that he gave up for her. She wakes up kind of freaking out, thinking that she's alone, and he has to comfort her and hold her hand to help her fall back to sleep. And it reminded me a little bit of Linden breaking out into a sweat every time somebody suggests like putting him in a room, you know, because he really started to get a bit of claustrophobia after being locked up by people a bunch of times. And she's just like, the whole series of interactions with her is her slowly growing a little bit more close and familiar and affectionate with him in a way that he can tell, I think, that it's like gonna be not very long before he has to sort of like set some real boundaries with her. But for now, she can sense that Yerin has become an overlady. And I thought that was interesting, that from far away she can tell that that's happened. And Linden is prepping to go and touch the Titan. And I was going to say drain it. Drain is too small a word. Feed on it, I guess, is part of it, is the best way to say that. And he has a bunch of people watching his back, which is making him feel a little bit better about the situation. Fury had to watch over them. Mercy would be at his side. He couldn't prevent Ruby from coming. With the two of them together and Fury watching for heralds, he felt much safer. And I will say, I definitely thought, I noticed here that Pride wasn't included, and I was like, you know Pride's coming, right? And indeed he is. Lyndon's not aware of it, but Ethan is. Because Ethan winds up turning up. And I really love so much how Ethan's like, I can't believe that you didn't invite me. Lyndon pressed his fists together and bowed. What need is there for an invitation between brothers? I know that wherever I go, you go as well. Good shit. I like it. So, yeah, Pride is like, why did you think I wasn't coming? I heard what you were doing. Of course I'm coming. I was right there when you asked permission for it. You think I don't want to be here to see this shit, you lunatic? And I was like, he's got a point. And eventually, after a little bit of bickering, they all just accept that indeed he will be coming with them. So, I love too when he says, I'm the son of a monarch, and Mercy like pats his arm and says, I know you are. Oh God, so good. I love that she talks like that, but she's absolutely sincere. Anybody else, it would sound so snotty. And she's just so genuine that I can't be mad because she means it. And he knows that. So he's not mad at her either. He's just kind of like, So this is when there's some questions about Ruby's like memories. And how it is that she knows who Ethan is. Is that like her own memory of him, or is it her remembering something that Yerin experienced? And she's like, it's not even really like, I can't even draw that sort of delineation. It's very difficult to tell what's one or the other. Mercy asks, do you like being on your own? Ruby nodded. It's me and her now, not all us. Now I have something for me. And that is such a tragic thing to hear right before we know like what they decide to do. It makes sense. It's the right thing to do, but it is just so bittersweet. So at this point, Dross tells them that Yeren's got basically a 50% chance of beating Sephara, which Dross sees as a pretty big improvement from what their percentages were last time, but nobody else seems very excited to hear this news. So, I'm trying to find the spot where he actually goes to touch the Titan. He extended his right hand, stretching fingers of white Madra. The arm wanted to shoot forward and feast, but he had such control that the limb didn't even tremble. So, he reaches forward, and he basically is overwhelmed by this other consciousness. Sleep had held him for too long, but he had almost shaken free of it. Soon he would walk again. And this time he was hungry for more than just the delicious powers he could feel within the earth. He smelled the one thing that could fill the endless hunger inside of him. He pictured himself wading through mountains like tall grass, tossing them aside, and finally finding the one meal that would put an end to his eons of starvation. Home. He would find what he needed at home in the tunnels where he had been born. Home. He was going home to his brother tucked away between 4 peaks. Home. Lyndon fought his way back to awareness as though struggling to the surface amid storm-tossed waves. He was lying on his back. He tasted blood. Dross was screaming at him, and Ruby stood over him with teeth bared and gold signs extended, a fence of blood and sword aura shredding anything that came close. All around, dread beasts threw themselves at him like they'd gone insane. Lyndon tried to push his way up to fight, but his body wouldn't listen. He was still swallowed in the vision, in the overwhelming desire to get home. He was starting to separate his own memories from the Dread Gods now, but that only made his fear sharper, more real. The Dread God's home was his home. When it woke, it would head straight for Sacred Valley. Before he could speak, he passed out. So this is just really like part of like this overall mystery, right? We've heard that Sacred Valley is cursed. And when people use the word cursed, it can mean anything. We know that when people are in Sacred Valley, their abilities begin to be sapped away from them. We saw what happened to the Sword Sage. And then there's Orthos, who we haven't seen in a minute, and his becoming a Jade again after he was at the peak of like Underlord, I think. Just at the peak of True to Underlord. Like he was trying to get to Underlord. And then talking about how now he felt like he was a Jade. So because of the fact that this Dread God specifically, I'm not sure if all the Dread Gods are from the same place, but I'm kind of assuming that they're not all from the exact same place, that they're like, maybe, I don't know. But I'm wondering if that's like the fact that their abilities are being pulled out of them is the effect of something like that's still linked to a Dread God, that like there's something that's siphoning off of them, feeding on them all the time. That's obviously a very like indistinct sort of theory, but the fact when he says like his brother is still tucked away between four peaks, it feels like there's a Dread God still buried right underneath Sacred Valley somehow. And I just, I don't know. Because it doesn't seem like the other Dread Gods are able to just feed on people's power right out of the air in that sort of way. They attack in a very physical way. And they are able to exert, like, psychic pressure and, but it's not really, it hasn't been something that I have witnessed, like a manifestation of what I'm talking about before. So it might be like this being that he's calling his brother isn't exactly the same as a Dread God. I don't know if it's related to that, like, little fox dude, brother, what's his name? If that person being Sacred Beast is anything that's, like, related to the Dread Gods, or if he's his own thing. When I think back to how that guy was, like, kept in this tower and you could, like, have an audience with him, it's a pretty unusual sort of circumstance. I don't see a lot of other cities treating any sacred beasts in that manner. So I feel like he's got to be linked to something somehow, but I don't know. And yeah, thank you, Andy. Elder Whisper. Thank you. So yeah, I don't know. This is interesting. So he wakes up and he's okay, but he definitely turns and throws up and then shares what he learned and his, like, basically terror right now as he's realizing what's so concerning, what this Titan is intending to do. And eventually he has to get them to promise, because the first thing that Mercy says is, oh, you don't need to worry. They're going to be evacuating everybody in the Dread God's way. And then Dross has to be like, well, that's not really true, because his home is like a special zone that they're not allowed to evacuate. It's actually illegal to do it. So they're not really going to be included in that whole thing. And finally, Lyndon says, if I stay here to, like, let everything else sort of shake out first, can you guarantee me that we'll make it to Sacred Valley before the Dread God does? And everybody's sort of like, dude, we can't promise anything. And then, of course, Athan steps in and is like, yes, I can. And I trust Athan on that. I don't think that he would make that kind of promise if he didn't know that it was, like, 90% likely. So at this point is when Ruby says that it's time for her to go. Her 3 days is up. And she tries to kiss Lyndon. And he has to stop her and say, "You're not Yerin." Ruby dropped back down. For a second, she shifted her weight from one foot to the other, and then she nodded. "No, I'm not. I'm not. I'm me." She forced a smile that was painfully different from the last. "Bye, Lyndon." And everybody is just like, "Oh, God, dude, that was so brutal to watch. The poor thing. You just ripped her heart out. Like, you did the right thing, no doubt, but oof." And honestly, I just like, if they're all correct, and also I feel so bad for Lyndon because she looks so much like Yerin, and having to reject somebody and look at the pain on their face when they look like the person that you are actually in love with, that's got to be really awful too. So then we go to this meeting between Kaelin Archer and Regan Shen and Brother Aiken and Yan Shomei, maybe. And basically, Regan Shen is like, "Okay, y'all did real well. I appreciate how well you represented my name. Good job. I have one last thing for you to do. I'm going to give you a gate key. When the tournament is over, you're going to go through it, and you're going to kill Malice's youngest children." And we're in Kaelin's POV here, and he's remembering what Mercy did in the battle, in the tournament, and he's just like, well, can we? I'm not confident. No offense. Thanks for the compliments, but like, we all know she should have gone further than we did because she just happened to be up against Saphara. Like, you know, we all know. And when he's like really cautious about how much he's asking questions, because he knows if he pushes it too far, it's going to sound like he's second guessing Regan Shen, and he can't be doing that. You know, the dude's a fucking monarch. So he has to gently be like, are we capable of that? And eventually, Regan Shen, you know, assures him that all kinds of things have been put into place to make this possible. And he asks, if you're sending a sage to like look out for us, why do you even need us? As I said, I don't need you. I have chosen you because the parallels are pleasing to me. And when you return, I will give you anything you desire. Shomei, you can have a Nagi's head on a plate. I want to know all about that. This reminds me too, when Shomei stumbles across Lyndon the second time in Ghostwater, because there's the first time when they're all together, and that's when Renfei dies. But later, she comes up out of like the depths at some point really suddenly, and he didn't know she was there inside one of the buildings, I think. And she mistakes Lyndon as an agent of some other person, and basically throws out this accusation of like, "Oh, you thought you were stopping me. You can tell Injira and so that I have it and they can't stop me now." And then she like fucking cackles and disappears into the night like a witch. And he's just sort of like, what the fuck was that? So I'm assuming Anagi is maybe one of the people that she mentioned here. And I want to know what this grudge is. I don't feel like we've heard that in her POV. She hasn't like thought about that grudge or whatever it is that's going on there. Brother Aiken, your master recently suffered a crippling injury. It's healed. Is that the one that Lyndon got to, guys? I'm so proud of Lyndon that he can inflict the kind of like damage on somebody that would require a monarch's help to heal. Yikes. Good for you, Lyndon. Good for you, buddy. You've come so far. Look at you. Do any of you fear reprisal from Malice? It is likely she will be dead before moonrise tonight, but even if she lives, you are mine now. I do not give up what is mine. So that's as much as he's like able to guarantee that if they do this, they're still going to be safe afterwards. And to be honest, I don't entirely buy it, but you got to believe the guy because you're in a position where you don't really have the choice. So what can you do? Then we go to Safara. And she is like actively sensing her spirit falling apart because of the way that she advanced too quickly. And she is hearing her monarch, the king, tell her, when you win, we'll make your body and spirit anew. You will become the next monarch from my bloodline. There is no failure in you. And yeah, you know, that's not how that's going to go. So, Yerin and Ruby get together. Yerin's very salty about the fact that Ruby bailed and didn't allow for the time to practice using this, the Moonlight Bridge. But as it turns out, once she gets into that ring, she doesn't need practice. It's immediately understood. And she basically just teleports in and out of different places. And you would really think that would be it. But Safara is still able to withstand her. And the first time when she goes in there and connects with the sword icon, she does it for a more prolonged period than we have seen from her. And we're only in her head, so we're feeling pretty good about how this all seems to be going. And then she sort of comes back to herself and realizes that she comes back to herself because of like a fuzziness that comes to her because of blood loss. So, and she looks down and just realizes that she's absolutely coated in blood. And, Yerin hadn't realized how much she'd been sliced to ribbons. She looked bloodier than Ruby ever had. While Yerin was still shocked, Safara's Archlord weapon ignited. When Yerin's head came off, the last thing she saw was that same smug look on Safara's face. So, then we go to Yerin and the two sages arguing about what she should do. And essentially what they're telling her is, you gotta get that fucking sword icon shit under control. It's not fair that you have to do that because you're only an overlady, and really, before Archlord, that's almost an impossible ask. But we're asking it because if you can't do that, you're not gonna make it. And so, she goes into the next fight, hinging her hopes on that yet again. And it's even faster the next match. She connects with the sword icon like more quickly than she did before, but the match is over even sooner. And Min Shui is seeing her progress in the connection with the icon improve, and that for her is proof that this is the path Yerin should be taking, which I really do understand her kind of feeling that way. But as Yerin points out, the more I focused on that, the more quickly I was taken down. Like, clearly those things aren't my path to success right now. It may be long-term success, but it's not going to get me through this fucking match, you know? So finally, Yerin and Ruby have this moment and they look at each other. And Yerin asks if the two of them will leave her and Ruby alone to talk. And she makes herself a little teary-eyed so that she can sort of manipulate the Winter Sage. And this is when she asks Ruby, if you swallow my spirit and take my body, can you win? And Ruby clearly thinks about it for a minute. And then is just like, no, I'm not doing it. Lyndon would hate me. And Yerin loses her shit at the Lyndon would hate me. More than the rejection of the idea, the reasoning behind it upsets her. I think there's a bit of jealousy there. A weirdness of jealousy. It's a good novel name. A weirdness of jealousy. And also a sense of like frustration seeing a reflection of herself putting another person ahead of her own desires. Like, it's like the same thing as watching a friend make a bad decision and understanding why they are, but being like, dude, no. And she says, what do you want? And Ruby says, I'm aiming for us all to live. You hearing me? Everybody. And all of a sudden, she's like, you know what? My signature. Holy shit. Why am I trying to be a sage? We should just combine. Let's just combine now. Let's do this now. And at first, Ruby's like, what the fuck are you talking about? We can't do that. We're trying, what are you talking? And Yerin rightfully is like, oh yeah, we're not supposed to be doing that until I'm an archlady. I'm not supposed to be touching the sword icon until I'm an archlady either. And they're out here asking me to do that. If they think I can do that, there's no reason I can't do this thing. And finally, Ruby's like, all right, you know what? That's a compelling argument. And they sit down and they begin their like battle of wills. And the Winter Sage senses it, busts back into the room and stops them. And their spirits freeze in place. But both Yerin and Ruby are so strong and so unified in this moment that they push against it, snap her working, and keep right along. And the Winter Sage is about to do a second batch of her, like, working. And Charity tells her, don't take away what chance they have. And finally, the Winter Sage backs off. Because I really thought that they were going to have to fight her, and it was going to be this whole thing. And I was so glad Charity was there. It's funny because if Charity wasn't here, this would all have gone very differently. Charity was the key to making sure that Yerin wound up pursuing this instead of trying to burn it, lock it away, whatever. Thank God for Charity. I called Charity a bitch so many times, and I stand by all of them, like she is. But bitches get shit done. So there it is. So, Yerin, this moment, guys, new memories flowed into her now. Records of Sephara that Dross had given her, wielding the endless sword to protect an unconscious Linden from a sea of dread beasts. Linden holding her hand as she tried to fall asleep. There was no resistance, but Yerin felt grief and regret flow from Ruby, along with her Madra. Her time had been too short. Then it was her grief, her regret. And what was she sad about anyway? She wasn't going anywhere. But she is going somewhere. She's still Yerin, but she's changed. She's different. There's just no getting around that, She had to forge herself back together. Her old body wasn't quite right. It didn't represent who she was anymore. She had some choices to make. She hadn't liked bright red hair, but it had become part of her. Maybe one lock. Her eyes, she didn't really want eyes so similar to Fury's. Then again, when she tried to change them to Yerin's black, she found it easier to keep them as Ruby's red. She didn't mind what color her eyes were anyway. She could make more dramatic changes to her body, but she didn't need them. She liked the way she looked. It was her, and now there were enough changes to represent the new her. One change, though, she didn't have any control over. When her body returned, condensing into reality, she extended all 6 of her gold signs. They still had a metallic gleam, but now they were a bright, vivid scarlet. So Charity scans her and goes heavens above, which was my first clue, like, oh, this isn't some, like, incremental little step. Something big just happened here, clearly. The Winter Sage is crying, but that doesn't mean anything. A bunch of other people scan her. So, Yerin's like, you know what I think I'm going to do? I'm just going to need to step over to fucking North Strider real quick. And she tears through space and winds up right next to him. And is like, kind of just stops next to him like, oh God, and then apologizes like, sorry, this is all new. And the monarch says, we have a problem. You're not allowed to advance past Overlady. Archlords can't compete. But you haven't actually advanced to an Archlord. So we don't have a rule for this. We need to figure out what to do. And eventually, they get fucking, what is it that I kept calling him? Kieran Culkin. They get him to come down and basically be like, the fuck you need me for? Yeah, let her fight. Shut up and get on with it. And I was like, that sounds right. So, she beats the ever-loving shit out of Saphara. And Saphara is so pissed. And her master is so livid that Northstrider is having to shield Yerin from the force of his anger. Because he just assumed he had this sewn up. He was completely confident about it. And there was no reason not to be. And now it's all over. And there's not a thing he can do. It's too late. And I love how satisfied Northstrider is with this. I wonder if if all of the monarchs sort of knew what Yerin should do. And they were waiting to see if she'd do it. I don't know what the rules are, if they couldn't tell her. It feels like Malice sort of knew what she should do. And was trying to nudge her. But there's also a sense that, like, monarchs don't feel like they should just say to a person what it is they see. Because it doesn't mean anything if you don't come to these conclusions yourself. I don't know. So then we go to Lyndon, who has heard about the first 2 losses that she's had. And as far as he's concerned, if she's lost twice in a row, that's a wrap. Like, there's no reason to think it's going to be different in the third one. And he's having a lot of trouble focusing on what it is that they're trying to do here while waiting for the results of these matches. And meanwhile, they're like hemmed in by dragons who are all also waiting on the results. And the first 2 come through and they are very excited and happy about the results, obviously. But then there's the third one. I'm trying to find the spot here where it comes through. Let's see. He wanted to be closer to Fury so he could get the battle report that little bit sooner. When the violet spark appeared only a moment later, his throat clenched shut. The only reason for the fight to be so short was Saphara annihilating Yerin. Yerin won, Dross repeated. Yerin won. Wow, we owe Yerin some congratulations. Overhead, Fury began to laugh. So then we have the, final fight. She lops off the dragon's head in this, second to last one. And I love that, Northstrider has to be like, hey, you're going to need to, not prep your technique while I'm telling you that it's time to go, because that's going to end the fight too quick. So just hold your horses. She can cycle and prep a technique, but you can't. Just chill. And man, that's having a handicapper, you know? And then in the last one, Saphara comes at her, just pure rage, just has completely lost it. And Yerin uses this weapon that she's been hanging on to, the Nether Claw. Nether Claw is that the name of the weapon that she's got? That's the name of the technique inside the weapon. Am I right? Or is that the name of the sword? No, it is the sword name. My bad. She summoned the black-bladed sword Nether Claw and activated the technique. Right. Okay. Yerin poured not only soul fire into it, but put all her will behind it. She urged the claw to become stronger. Saphara put both hands behind a river of dragon's breath, still screaming. The nether claw crashed into the ground. It crushed Saphara. It shattered the ground. It split the arena in two, revealing a shimmering barrier of purple light separating the arena from the outside world. And then even that barrier cracked. And Safara's dead, and that's bonkers. If I'm not mistaken, is that barrier the one that the Monarchs put in place in the last section? I kind of assumed it was, but if she was able to break it, I feel like it can't be. But what do I know? So, Fury is out here just being like, oh, you fucking cowards. And because they're trying to be like, we're letting you leave. And Fury's like, yeah, oh yeah, you're letting us leave. Sure. You know, we're not the ones that are trapped, actually. And then Fury begins to fucking advance. He accesses a fist icon, the symbol of bodily power. Only then did Lyndon feel the Madra overwhelming and impossibly powerful as the entire valley was covered in shadow. Zorus choked out a voice tinged with fear and anger. Why? If you could advance, why did you wait? To see this look on your face. Then 3 other heralds unveiled their power and the true battle began. Oh my goodness. That is such satisfying shit. I will tell you what. I love it so much. Oh, Fury. You are just delightful. What an enjoyable guy. And I really I had sort of been equating him in a lot of ways with Ethan because of both of them being bored. And there's something so funny about how much he hates Ethan now. I like it. This is good. Let's see. Andy says the Monarch barrier is separate and invisible. Ofer says, no, it's just protection for the audience. Ah, gotcha. Cool. Yerin really should have claimed Fury as her prize, says Jan. Yeah, I gotta work on that casting, guys. Maybe I'll do that as part of my wrap-up. I'll come up with an official cast list that I've decided is like my definitive casting. Because I gotta make Fury, like, appealing somehow, you know? But I need him to be like, he's supposed to look like he's in his 30s, if I'm not mistaken, right? Pretty much like the Monarchs and Heralds don't really like look much older as a rule than about 35. I think there was one that we've met that looked older, and that was sort of like they were an outlier for showing signs of aging, but I can't remember who it was now. But anyway, yeah, so that's a great spot to end. I can't believe this book is over next week, you guys. Or not even next week. The end of this week. What am I going to do? I'm so sad. All right, but that is a good spot to wrap it up. So thank you all again so much for hanging out with me and for helping me out with information and whatnot. I really appreciate you, Andy, for commissioning this episode. Don't forget, if any of you are interested in commissioning Will's other series, to get in touch. And Evil, that was the Aurelia Sage. Yes, thank you. That's who I was thinking of. I thought it was a woman. Yes, thank you. But yeah, get in touch with me on spoiledpodcast@gmail.com. And I will see you guys all on Friday, 5:30 Central Time. And then on the following Tuesday, also at 5:30 for the wrap-up episode. So hopefully y'all can join me. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.